Folks, we're looking at Edge Magazine issue 16, which was released in January 1995, actually more like December 1994, and discussing the future of interactive entertainment, because that's what Edge does. So this cover has something odd. We see the main character of Little Big Adventure playing on a Sega Saturn. Now, maybe at the time the programmers planned to release the game for the Saturn, but it wasn't. It was released for the PC and the PlayStation. But you can see he's holding the Saturn controller. And nevertheless, this magazine discusses indeed the Saturn and Little Big Adventure. So let's dive on in. The opening column is about the Saturn and about how, basically two things. First of all, that the Saturn, excuse me, I've got to scratch my eye. The Saturn was released, I believe, a week or two earlier than the PlayStation in Japan and sold out immediately. So that was a good start for the Saturn. And but they also talk about how the PlayStation was a better console for 3D, while the Saturn was a better console for 2D, and that this might turn out to be a problem. And it definitely was. Now, what I like about this picture is that if you look closely, you can see that Akira's eyes, you can see that they're texture mapped. Same with his mouth. So that's how the Saturn was able to do Virtual Fighter on the Saturn, by texture mapping some of the details. And in practice, it looks pretty much the same. So it was an okay conversion. Just a bit low on the frame rate. So we have Sid Meier here. We'll get back to him later on. Nope. The first news is about the PlayStation. We see some new things, like this Namco joypad, which was good for racing games to give analog steering. We have the mouse, which I don't think anybody used. The memory card, of course, which made the PlayStation a bit more expensive. There's some talk about the pricing of the games, and indeed, PlayStation games were a bit cheaper, but not much more cheaper than the cartridge games. And apparently this is a celebrity of sorts. I don't recognize them, but playing Mototown GP. And here's some images of some early Sega stuff, including the demo. And I don't know what this is, some candy. We also have Toshinden. Some images of Tekken, which would be a big seller for the PlayStation. Not one of my favorite games. The next page discusses the 32X, mostly meant for the American market. The American markets would get the Saturn later than the Japanese, but they would release the 32X earlier. And they talk about the games, and here are 6 of the ones. And Edge is quite critical, saying, well, here's the Star Wars game. That's okay. Doom isn't as good as on the Jaguar. Who cares about Afterburner? Who cares about Space Harrier? This is some kind of fighting game. It wasn't released at the time. And they have Virtual Racing, which was probably the best game at the time. But hey, it was quite a lot like the Genesis version. So why would you buy a 32X? 3DO in bad waters. The company was losing money very badly, and therefore publishers of games had to spend an extra $3 to 3DO for every game they sold. So instead of spending $3, they would spend $6 just for the the license, and the kind of thing Nintendo also does. And that hurt the 3DO base. But yeah, they were stuck in a corner because it wasn't going. They weren't losing too much money. Gold Star nevertheless still released the 3DO. And there's talk about the M2, which would not replace the 3DO, but there was talk about it already. Game Over the Book, one of the first important games about video games, gets a re-release. Alright, so here's some talk about something called Reality Lab. I didn't read this article, But apparently faster 3D for games developers. Probably a software package. But there were a lot of software packages at the time for 3D graphics. Speaking of which, next page we have Silicon City, which was an exhibition for everything Silicon Graphics was doing at the time. So that's how big Silicon Graphics was in the mid-90s. They were everywhere. I never hear about them anymore. There's also bad news for the Amiga and the Commodore brand. First of all, the chicken head, which was the Commodore logo, would discontinue, unfortunately. And yeah, the Amiga's losing money. And this is about another company buying them. The company, but as they say at the end of this article, next month we'll see if Amiga's still around or not. There's also talk about Amiga working with RISC chips instead of a Motorola 68,000 chips, but I don't think that ever came to fruition. Okay, so the owner of Future Publishing went to America and left the company of sorts. And what was this about again? Oh yeah, Edge had their own exhibition. A lot of people came. And there was a Sony PlayStation you could play there. Woo. I kind of like this commercial. It's a flighting sim, and the picture's upside down, so you see more of the scenery. It also gives you a sense like, hey, I'm in an airplane. I could fly upside down. Yeah. Edge subscription. Here are the letters. Okay, some people talking about the end of Amiga. What else do we have here? More complaints about Aliens versus Predator only getting a 4, and Edge being like, yeah, no, we stick to our number. This will be the last time we talk about this. So, more talk about the differences between using the C compiler or sticking to assembly code, which is an ongoing discussion in the letters of Edge. And this person seems to say that assembly is the way to go if you really want to get the most out of games. Alright, and that's the was there anything else in the letters section that was interesting? I don't think so. No. So, let's go on to the previews. This looks like Revolution X, doesn't it? Did Elite make them? At the time, it was a hit at the arcades. So, Cyber Sled, an arcade game, may have been released for the PlayStation. I don't remember ever playing it on it. But yeah, it was like a shooting game in the arcade on machines. And I thought it was pretty cool. I've never played it. I always wanted to. I was a fan of the Virtual On series, which is kind of like this, but made by Sega. Tekken. A game I actually detested at the time because it was clunky and was badly balanced and looked horrible too. And I just wanted people to keep playing Street Fighter because I was good at Street Fighter, and to this day I love Street Fighter 2, especially Super Turbo. And yeah, so Super Turbo was released about half a year ago, and I was still totally into it, and people were like, oh yeah, Tekken, this, that, and I didn't like it. I just didn't like its awkward gameplay. And to this day, I don't like Tekken that much. It's gotten better. I'm one of the few people who actually likes Tekken 4 the most, probably because it's the most like Virtual Fighter. But, you know, ever since Tekken 6, it's been nicer. Slower punches, so they're more mind games. I prefer less combo-centric. Anyhow, let's continue with Clockwork Knight. Yeah, mostly just showing images of the pre-rendered images, which would later become sprites. They're very nicely animated. But Edge talking about, oh, this is pretty shallow gameplay. Is there anything really we're looking forward to? We didn't even bother reviewing Donkey Kong Country, so why should we look at this? Well, because it's a Saturn game. 3DO making just bad commercials? What is this? Electronic Arts lard? Why would people be interested in your games if you're using blocks of fat? Oh, Starblade Alpha, a game like Star Fox in the arcades, released in 1991, and yeah, it looked a lot better than Star Fox. So a lot of polygons and shooting around, and apparently they would release it for the PlayStation 1 too. So a lot of arcade games from Namco going to the PlayStation 1. I don't think that many people were interested in though, except Tekken and Ridge Racer, of course. But the old ones, nah, people didn't care. Speaking of which, Raiden was also making its way to PlayStation 1, and nobody cared about this, but still, Edge gives 2 pages. Raiden was a above-average side-scrolling shooter. That's all I can say about it, really. Ultimate Parodius, well, if you like your side-scrolling shooters with funny images, you have that. Also making its way to the PlayStation. I'm surprised Dungeon Master 2 got an advert. Donkey Kong Country, the game of 1994 commercially, but Super Metroid was so much better. Okay, so Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo, or X as it's called in Japan, for the 3DO. The normal controller didn't have enough buttons, so you had to get another controller, but I've never seen one in my life. And this is a very good port of the arcade. It actually has better sound. The backgrounds don't move in 3D though. But the gameplay's fine. It feels a bit different than Super Turbo, but that could just be me. Maybe it's just a controller. I've never trusted it as an arcade perfect game, gameplay-wise. But looking at it, yeah, it's just nice. Victory Goal for the Sega Saturn, a preview. One of the many sports games for the Saturn. This was made by Sega. I don't remember if it was good. We'll probably find out later. And the Sega Saturn getting lots of pages, about the specs, about the history, how it first was going to be 2 different computers. You would first buy the game playing part using cartridges, and then you can get a CD add-on, but they ended up integrating those 2, and then later they decided to add extra chips for the 3D capabilities. And in the end, it was a mess. I mean, if you take a closer look at this, you'll see a lot of different chips, texture mapping, RAM. What is this? This is for like 3D effects of sorts. But yeah, you had one chip would do the 2D stuff, and the other would do the 3D things, if I'm correct. I don't even know what this is. But yeah, it was a mess. It was hard to program for the machine, and that hurt. Showing off some new games. Daytona, Golden Axe fighting game, and Title Fight, the boxing game, which would use different hardware than AM2's games, Virtua Fighter, and a release schedule. So Edge going in depth, and I think I'm going to leave it here. So next time we'll get to the end of the magazine. One last thing I want to say is that interesting, the Edge this time was 116 pages long, which at the time was the biggest. The magazine the first year was always 100 pages. Then they had some issues which were 108, and now creeping to 116. And next time I'll tell you why I find that an interesting amount. So see you then.